In the stillness of a medieval village where the rhythm of life was marked by bells and seasons, there were moments when another rhythm intruded, a low, insistent thrum that grew into the drumbeat of war. It seldom began with a sudden clash. More often it arrived like weather, whispered first in rumor, then spoken in certainty, then thundered in the tramp of boots. War was not an abstract idea. It was an approaching storm felt in every hearth, every field, every churchyard. The first signs came with talk. A traveller at market muttered of quarrels between lords, of insults given and not forgiven, of borders disputed, of oaths broken. He said he had seen banners gathering in the next shire, had heard smithies ring all night with hammers on iron. Men paused in their haggling to listen. Women carrying baskets clutched them tighter. Few had need to ask what such news might mean, for everyone knew that when knights quarreled, peasants suffered. Soon the messengers came. They rode with haste, their horses lathered, bearing the seal of a lord. They shouted proclamations in market squares, nailed notices to church doors. Some declared the call to arms. Vassals summoned, retainers commanded, every able man ordered to bring spear or bow. Others threatened fines for failure, or promised pardon for debts if service were given. These messengers did not linger. They left dust and unease behind them, for war did not ask politely, it commanded. The sound of war began at the forge. Blacksmiths who once mended plows and shaped nails turned to helmets and swords. Bellows roared, sparks flew. Apprentices' arms ached from ceaseless hammering. A breastplate cooled in the trough with a hiss that sounded like anger itself. Children peered wide-eyed through doorways at rows of spearheads, at shields stacked like loaves, at carts groaning under new-forged iron. The village learned that iron was not only for tilling soil, but also for spilling blood. At the manor, retainers drilled in the yard. Young men who had never held more than a hoe were thrust spears and told to keep rank. The steward barked orders, the sergeant corrected grips with sharp blows. Horses, restless, stamped and whinnied as they were fitted with harness and caparison. The lord himself, clad in mail, inspected his men, promising reward and honor. Yet eat as he spoke of loyalty and glory, the peasants thought of fields left untended, of families left behind, of what it would mean if their master did not return. Rumors carried further dread. Outlaws and mercenaries, smelling profit, trailed after armies. Villagers told tales of companies of soldiers who lived by plunder, who set fire to barns, who took what they wished. Children whispered of ghosts that followed war, spirits of the unburied dead who marched forever. Some said they had heard the wild hunt in the wind, its spectral hounds howling, its riders calling men to battle they could not escape. Fear sharpened as war drew nearer. Yet not all felt dread alone. Young men, restless, felt excitement stir. To march with banners, to bear arms, to win honor, It was a chance to be more than a ploughman. Songs were sung of knights who gained riches and renown, of squires who rose to glory. Alehouses buzzed with talk of deeds to be done. Some laughed too loudly, boasting of scars they did not yet have, but their eyes shone bright. War promised danger, but also change, and for the young, change was a temptation. For women, the drumbeat of war brought other labors. They prepared food for journeys, mended cloaks, stitched banners. They packed bread into cloth sacks, brewed ale to fill skins, gathered herbs for healing. Mothers kissed sons with trembling lips. Wives tied tokens into husbands' belts. Children clung to fathers' knees. Some women prayed for swift return. Others prayed simply that their homes would be spared. For they knew that when men went to war, villages bore the scars. The church did not stand aside. Priests preached of just war and holy cause, blessing banners with holy water, holding aloft relics said to bring victory. They warned against sin, urged confession before battle, and promised that those who died in righteous fight would be remembered in prayer. Some wars were declared crusades, garlanded with indulgence and absolution. Others were simply feuds dressed in sacred words. Yet always the church bells rang, summoning men to listen, to kneel, to march with God's name on their lips. When armies gathered, the land itself seemed to stir. Roads filled with men and horses, carts creaking with supplies, smiths carrying spare tools, cooks with pots. The sound of drums and horns rolled ahead of them, echoing in valleys. Fields trembled under hooves, birds scattered before banners that rose like colored forests. The sight of so many men together, armored and armed, was both terrible and awe-inspiring. Villagers lined roads to watch, to cross themselves, to cry farewells. The drumbeat of war was no longer rumor, it was reality, passing their very doors. For those left behind, silence fell. The forge quieted, the manor yard emptied, the fields missed strong hands. Women shouldered heavier burdens. Elders took tasks they thought long behind them. Children grew quickly. Night seemed longer, bells heavier, prayers more urgent. Letters were rare, news scarcer still. Each dawn was met with hope for peace, each dusk with fear of smoke rising on the horizon. The drumbeat had moved on, but its echo lingered in every heart. And so, in the medieval world, war began not with clashing swords, but with whispers, with forges, with sermons, with drums rolling down dusty roads. It was both dreaded and desired, both holy and profane, both ruin and opportunity. The drumbeat of war was a summons no one could ignore, for it called not only knights and lords, but whole communities, whole valleys, whole kingdoms into its shadow. And once begun, it rarely ended quickly. A knight did not spring fully formed from saddle and steel. He was grown like an oak, slow, deliberate, season by season, ring by ring. Before the banners and spurs, before the oath and the charge, There were years of small obediences, learning where to put a foot, how to hold a gaze, when to bend and when to stand. The make of a knight began in childhood and ended, if it ended at all, only at death, for even honor must be kept sharpened like a blade. In the great hall of a lord, where rushes were strewn and hounds lay under benches, a boy of 7 might be taken from his mother's hand and given to a new household. He arrived with a small bundle, a larger fear, and a name that would be shaped by other mouths. He became a page, a small servant to greater duties. He learned first to be useful, to carry trenchers and cups without spilling, to fetch messages swiftly through corridors that echoed with his own footsteps, to keep his tongue and his temper when older lads laughed. Courtesy was not ornament, it was armor for the unarmored. The page's world was a school of eyes and hands. He watched the lady of the house, learning the quiet economy of command, a lifted brow, a precise word. He watched the steward, who could reckon bread and beer for 100 mouths with a glance at the larder. From him the boy gleaned that order saves men as surely as courage. He watched the lord at table, measuring how a man holds himself when others watch, and how a man listens when others speak. He learned the names of guests, the crests on their shields, the kinships that tied and tangled the realm. To serve was to study. There were games, too, made as serious as prayers. In the courtyard he ran until breath burned, learning how the body answers command. He wrestled with boys stronger than himself, and learned both defeat and its cure. He threw light javelins at straw, and if he missed, he fetched them with a smile. He learned to leap to a horse's back with a hand on mane and 1 foot in air, laughing at failure and repeating the leap until the laugh turned to triumph. Even play had a purpose. The muscles built by joy are the ones that last. Older boys wore a different name, squire. Between page and knight lay this narrower bridge, built of harder boards. A squire took one master into his daily keeping, his harness, his weapons, his horse, his honor. He learned the way mail sings when lifted, the places where links tire and must be mended, the patient art of rubbing rust from rings until they shine like fish in a stream. He learned to lace vambraces until a knight's hand could flex, to buckle greaves so shin did not chafe, to settle a helm so neck could bear its weight without complaint. A squire's failure was a knight's wound, a squire's care could be a knight's life. Druin often found the squires in the yard with wooden swords that smarted like truth. They drilled in pairs, cut and parry, thrust and bind, the sequence repeated until the body remembered when the mind forgot. They learned to keep the shield high without hiding their own sight, to step off line rather than retreat, to use the weight of an opponent's strike to open a path for their own. Bruises bloomed like small lessons. Pride was the one rash that must not be scratched. The master-at-arms paced among them, a stick in hand sharper than any tongue, rapping a lazy elbow, lifting a sagging guard, teaching with blows that were never cruel but never soft. Bows had their hour as well. Though the longbow belonged more to the yeoman, even gentle-born lads were taught to feel a string's bite. They stood with feet set like roots and pulled until shoulders sang, until the breath matched the arrow's path. Squires learned respect for those who could bend a bow that took a man's height to string. They learned that no helm can despise a shaft that comes hissing from a hedge. If pride rose, the butts corrected it. A stray wind or a straying thought sets a feathered truth straight through arrogance. Horses were tutors with their own curriculum. A squire learned stable before saddle, currycomb stroke, hoofs clean, the smell that means grain enough and the smell that means mold. He learned a good mouth from a bad, a hollow back from a sound one, a temper from an eye that rolls too white. He fed before he ate, he watered before he drank. When he mounted, he rode not as a passenger, but as a partner. Thighs firm, heels light, hands steady. He guided a destrier through figures chalked to the yard-tight turns, sudden halts, smooth advances, until horse and rider moved like two notes sung as one. Armor had a voice the squire learned to hear. Mail whispered as it settled, plate spoke in jointed syntax, leather answered with creak and sigh, weight taught humility first, how much a man asks of his legs, how honest a back must be, but weight taught confidence next. Once born, it became a second skin, a shell the world struck in vain. The boy inside learned to be patient with himself, to breathe in shallower rhythm, to trust that fatigue would retreat before will, if will held steady. Armor does not make a man brave, it makes him honest about how bravery feels. The tourney field was theatre and school together. On saints' days or feasts, when banners bloomed like gardens and trumpets braided the air with silver thread, squires led their masters' horses out, eyes bright, hands calm. They watched the tilt, lances shivered, splinters flew, cheers rose and rolled like surf. In the melee, they saw chaos ordered by custom teams colliding in a press of snorting horses and hammering shields, capture worth more than killing, honor worth more than gain. When a knight was unhorsed, a squire darted in, swift and brave, to guard or rescue, to bring a fresh lance, to lead the rider back before pride could limber into shame. At night in the hall, when lamps made small suns of oil, the younger sat at the edge of older men's speech and learned the law that does not live on parchment, whom to trust with a flank, whom to humor and never follow, which lord pays late, which herald does not lie, which wound can be ridden with, which must be hidden, and which must be shown to the priest without delay. They learned that chivalry was not a cloak for preening, but a shirt that chafed, if not worn daily. Truth in word, mercy in power, steadiness in danger, service to the helpless, honor kept even when no song will sing it. Vigils stitched training to vow. On the eve of dubbing, a squire washed and was dressed in white. He spent the night in a chapel, alone or with a single friend at the far pew. The sword he hoped to earn lay upon the altar, a line of cold waiting for a warm hand. He knelt, rose, knelt again. He walked. He recited the psalms he knew and hummed the ones he did not. He remembered wrongs he had done and the faces of those who had forgiven them. Candlelight troubled the painted saints into life. He asked not for victory. Victory is a coin minted by men, but for courage and constancy, which are older currencies and hold their value. Morning brought ceremony, a bath given by elders to remind that clean hands must do clean work. A belt cinched to remind that strength is girded from within. Spurs buckled bright little suns at heel to remind that a man goes where he is needed. A blow light or stinging across the cheek to remind that pain must be met without anger. An oath given aloud before God and men to defend the weak, to keep faith, to honor justice, to shun treachery, to obey rightful command. Then the sword, taken up not as a toy but as a tool, as a trust, edge keen, point sure, heft balanced as a sentence well spoken. The first ride as knight was rarely glorious. It was to the stable to thank the old groom who had taught the boy not to fear a horse's rolling eye. To the kitchen to kiss the cook who had slipped him heels of bread when practice ran long. To the chapel to place a candle where last night's wax had cooled. Then perhaps to the yard to take a young squire's nervous hand and show him how a buckle lies flush if you give it tie and do not reset it. Knighthood repeats its make by make others. Training did not end. It changed its tasks. The knight learned command a harder art than any cut or parry. How to array men so that fear had no empty corners to grow in. How to place those quick to anger where a steady friend could see them. How to send a message that would not be misunderstood in wind and dust. He learned to read the ground as if it were a book, where hooves would founder, where wheels would bite, where a hedge hides friends, where a ridge hides enemies. He learned to listen to scouts who had mud on their boots and truth on their tongues. He also learned restraint, the virtue seldom sung. When a village stood before him, thatched, trembling like a field in wind, he reined in men whose blood had turned to thunder. He forbade the torch. He forbade the hand that would snatch bread from a child. He set guards at barns and wells. He paid for hay with coin or with promise that would be kept. He treated a captured foe well, first because it was right, second because reputations travel faster than armies. Many a gate has swung open for a captain known to spare. From priests he learned penance, from women patience, from old soldiers the humor that keeps a man's mind from breaking. He allowed the surgeon to cut deeper than pride wanted, because a wound that closes dirty will open a grave. He thanked the archer who had saved his life by an arrow loosed from an unseen hedge, and he did not sneer at the low-born hand that had guided it. He walked the camp by night and spoke to sentries by name. He kept his own sword clean and his own gear in order, for a leader who cannot master a buckle should not master men. There were failures. A horse bolted under a green knight and broke his arm, the lesson bound tighter than the splint. A blow taken for show cost a friend's life, and the memory wrote itself on the inside of eyelids and never faded. A boast in a hall led to a challenge on a field and to a widow at a window. Training did not prevent such things. It only gave a man a better chance to meet them rightly when they came. In winter, when war slept lightly and the land wore its white shirt, the yard rang still. Snow clung to mail like a second frost, breath made brief ghosts, leather stiffened and needed warming by the fire. Squires ran drills under pale sun, knights practiced with blunted blades, counting steps aloud so rhythm would be theirs when ice cheated feet. Indoors, heralds taught the grammar of colors and beasts, who bore argent or sable, who claimed lions or eagles, because to know a man's shield is to know his story before he speaks it. Song seeped into training as water seeps into wool. Minstrels told of warriors who held a ford alone, of ladies whose tokens steadied a shaking hand, of betrayals punished and loyalties rewarded. The young listened and believed too much. The old listened and believed enough. For though songs gild and omit, they point to truths the yard cannot teach, that courage begins in the heart before it reaches the hand, that mercy makes a man heavier in the scale of heaven, that honor lost in a moment takes a lifetime to earn back, and sometimes a lifetime is this enough. And when war called, when the drumbeat from the last chapter reached the hall, trained rose without fuss. Pages shouldered buckets and carried messages. Squires packed haversacks, checked girths, counted spare bowstrings. Knights tightened straps, spoke to horses, spoke to God, spoke to the men who would ride beside them. Helmets went on, the world narrowed to a slit and widened in the mind. The long practice of years entered the hands as quietly as a breath. A knight rode out not as a hero painted on a shield, but as a man of habits, small courtesies, precise labors, kept oaths. When the charge came, he lowered the lance and trusted the hours, when wood sword bruised his forearms and the drill master rapped his guard. When the melee turned to muddle, he trusted the map of ground he carried in his head and the names he knew by heart. When fear rose, he rode within the narrow music of his vow. And if he lived to ride home, he began again the work of shaping boys into men who might one day keep faith under steel. Thus the making of a knight was the making of a conscience in iron and leather. It bound strength to service, skill to steadiness, courage to care. The world saw the flash of helm and the glitter of spur. The world heard the trumpet. But beneath the polish lay years of saddle sows, blistered palms, aching shoulders, and the slow, tender growth of a soul learning how to carry weight without becoming hard. In that long apprenticeship, war found its best answer. Not rage, but discipline, not pride, but duty, not cruelty, but the practiced choice of mercy where mercy could be dared. And when night came to the training yard, because night comes everywhere, last sounds were humble ones, a currycomb clicking against a wooden rail, a boy laughing low at a joke only two share, a man kneeling in the chapel with hands that smelled of oil and horse and iron. The torches smouldered out, the stars took their watch, sleep descended on calloused hands and tired legs, and tomorrow before the bell the yard would wake again, because oaks do not grow in a day, and neither do nights. War, when it come down from banners and vows to the close work of men's hands, is made of wood, iron, horn, cord, glue, leather, and will. Tools fashioned in quiet places are carried into noisy ones. A sword begins as ore in the dark. A spear begins as ash tree in a hedgerow. A bow begins as a sapling that learned patience in winter winds. The battlefield is only the last page of a long book written by smiths, carvers, fletchers, bowyers, rope makers, tanners, wheelwrights, carters, and the men who bear the weight. To speak of weapons is to follow a chain of craft that stretches from forge to field, from ember to blood. The sword holds pride of place in song, though not always in numbers upon the day. It is a noble companion, balanced, quick, more letter than club, suited to the hand that has learned its grammar. In the smithy, the blade is born in layers, iron heated until it glows like banked sunrise, folded, hammered, tempered, plunged hissing into water or oil, then drawn again to a color the smith trusts. Lines appear along the metal like the grain of wood, telling a story of strength and flexibility married. A well-made sword rings when struck lightly, a sound like truth clear, exact, uncompromising. Not all swords are alike. The broad cutting blade that loves a downward hue is cousin to the longer, narrower type whose joy is in the thrust. Pommel and guard do more than adorn. They answer the wrist, balance the swing, catch the enemy's edge before it finds fingers. Leather is wrapped along the hilt, so sweat will not betray grip. Sometimes a thin cord lies beneath, biting the palm just enough to warn of slackness. A knight who tends his blade wipes it as one wipes a child's mouth, often, carefully, with something of tenderness. Steel returns what care you give it. Yet the unglamorous spear is older and more numerous, and the ground knows its punctuation. Ash or oak shaft, iron head leaf-shaped or long and square, a butt spike to balance and plant. Spear is democratic, efficient, obedient to drill. Set in close ranks with shields overlapping, spears become a fence that walks. Their points make a thicket in which horses balk and men think twice about pride. A peasant who yesterday thrust hay with a pitchfork learns quickly the forward step, the low brace, the angle that deflects rather than resists. A spear teaches humility by its very length. It reminds a man to keep distance, to work with companions, to prize steadiness over flourish. From spear grows the family of polearms, each with its own appetite. The glaive loves a wide cut from beyond sword's reach. The halberd marries axe to spike and hook, biting at armor, snagging reins, dragging men from saddles with a fisherman's patience. The bill, farm-born, remembers hedges and takes offense at horse and man alike, its beak worrying at gaps and joints. Such tools look ungainly on a wall, but graceful in practiced hands. They make a loud argument for the virtue of wood married to steel, and of villagers who have learned to hold a line. Shields stand where courage meets caution, the moving doors that let a man step through fear and return. Round, kite-shaped, heater-shaped, painted with colors and beasts that tell friend from foe from afar, they are planks layered and bound, faced with leather or canvas, rimmed in iron. They are heavy after a while. The shoulder complains, the forearm burns. Yet the shield teaches companionship with pain, and the man who has learned to live under its weight walks more bravely when the arrows fall. On its inner face a strap bears the mark of the hand that sweated there, and sometimes a prayer is scratched where no enemy sees. Mail is it weapon, but answer to weapon, a waterfall of rings that flows over the body and turns blade to bruise. The smith who rivets each link knows patience as few do. His work is measured in thousands. Mail sings when lifted and whispers when worn. It drinks oil and returns security. Plate arrives later in pieces fitted like shell to limb and chest, catching daylight like a small sun. Against such harness, weapons adapt. Points become more triangular and narrow. Hammers sprout beaks. Maces grow knobs like a cluster of iron fruit. Each blow invents a counterblow. War is an argument two craftsmen carry across men's bodies. The bow is a quiet thing until it speaks. Yew, if one can find it, has heartwood and sapwood that share the work. One compresses, the other stretches, and between them a strength is born that surprises the uninitiated. The bowyer listens to a stave with the knife. He scrapes, he tillers, he bends, he waits. When he strings it, a long, patient curve stands up, like a question about to be asked. The archer answers. Feet set, back straight, draw slow until shoulder and bow agree. Breath let out as the fletching touches the cheek. Fingers release like a word wisely chosen. The arrow's hiss is brief, but travels farther than many boasts. Arrows are a city of small labors. Shafts need straightening by heat and hand. Feathers must be cut and glued and bound with thread fine but strong. Heads pounded and socketed broad for flesh, bodkin for mail, barbed for the unkind work of making wounds refuse the surgeon's hand. A sheaf of 24 hangs at the archer's side like a promise both to two households, his own, who eat if he is accurate, and his enemies, who pray he is aught. In a battle line, the air becomes a weather of oak and goose. A cloud rises and falls, and men learn how loudly silence can fall in the space after the first volleys land. Crossbowmen bring a different music. Their bows are short and stubborn, made of layered horn and sinew or of steel. A windlass or goat's foot lever hauls the string to its notch. The bolt is stubbier than an arrow, but it has opinions about armor and announces them with authority. The church frowns, says such craft levels noble and churl alike too ruthlessly. Yet towns buy them, princes hire them, and on walls they keep faith where courage alone might falter. A crossbowman knows patience, the long breath while winding, and then the short, sharp release that sends quarrel with a heavy, unromantic certainty toward work. Knives and daggers walk quietly until it is too late to greet them properly. Bacillard, Rondel, Misericord, names like towns whispered quickly. They do the close work in the press, where shields are too wide and swords too long. A small point finds a joint or a visor slit. A narrow blade, slid beneath ribs, persuades a man to forgive the world. Such tools are not sung of at feasts, but surgeons know their handwriting, and priests know the measure of the sins they tempt. A man may fear a sword, but he distrusts a dagger. Hammers, axes, maces, these are plain words for plain blows. Against harness that laughs at slash and shrugs at shallow thrust, the hammer speaks bluntly to bone, the mace leans like a miller into its work, the axe wedges the iron door and pries it open. There is satisfaction in such strikes for those who love clarity. There is horror in them for those who cannot bear to hear metal complain. The arm that wields them learns a different kind than the swordsman's quicksilver, a gathering of weight, a descent like a verdict, a recovery that must be watched lest overreach betray the wrist. Then the engines, tall as houses, awkward as oxen, patient as monks. The ballista is a great crossbow with a giant's whim, hurling spears that fly like angry geese. The mangonel twists rope and wood together into a fist that throws stones into roofs. The trebuchet, king of levers, rides weight against distance and tosses boulders as a farmer tosses apples. They arrive with carpenters and ropes and curses. They eat timber as an army eats bread, and they find their voice slowly with trial shots that test the temper of walls. When stones begin to drum, towns kneel a little in their cellars and learn their own strength anew. Behind each engine stands a forest cut into parts. Great beams groan, wedges sing, mallets bruise, shoulders, pegs are driven home with thumps that carry to besieged ears as the first heartbeat of dread. Slingers and winchmen brown in sun, a clerk with chalk marks degrees on a timber upright. A captain counts the breaths between release and strike and adjusts, like a cook correcting a stew by taste alone. The hurled stone does not argue, it simply arrives, a round syllable that ends a sentence abruptly in dust. Siege does not live by stone alone. Sappers root at the foot of walls with picks and the discipline of moles, tunneling under towers, propping voids with timbers, then firing them so masonry settles into its own grave. Inside, the defenders listen with their feet for the sound of men in earth, the faint sub-song of danger. They dig counter tunnels, meet the invaders in cramped ground with short blades and shorter breath. Above, archers fire at pavies and mantlet. Below, men fight by touch and cough smoke until eyes water and resolve stings with it. Fire is the oldest ally and the most capricious. Pitch pots splatter and stick. Flaming bolts write brief, wandering lines in the night. Straw bundles torch the dry parts of wooden works. Oil takes the suggestion and makes it command. But wind is a prince with no treaty. It will betray attacker or defender as it pleases. A spark makes its career across thatch quicker than a rumor in a market. A bucket chain of sweating men mutters the psalm that knows all valleys, while passing hope from hand to hand. At dawn, black tongues of smoke write grammar no scholar envies along the sky. Between great matters, there are the small tools without which the great are mute. Straps hold harness to muscle and wheel to axle. Rivets bind plates and hinges obey them. Awls pierce, needles bind, wax seals, resin clings, pitch tightens seams, tar makes a boat more faithworthy. Rope is everywhere, wound, knotted, looped, singing under strain or purring under palm. Men speak to rope as to a mule, coaxing, cursing, thanking. Without these quiet things, swords would be sticks, and engines would be prayers without candles. A soldier's kit is a litany. Spare cord, whetstone, needle and thread, waxed thong, drinking skin, a twist of salt, a bit of soap hardened like a virtue too seldom used, a rag that has been a bandage before and will be again. He carries also what cannot be seen, his mother's blessing stitched inside his jerkin, a saint's badge on a thong, a token from a wife or girl bound to the hilt like a small standard no lord conferred. Weapons answer to these as much as to training. Men hold longer for love than for fear. In camp, the language of weapons shifts from clangor to caretaker's speech. A man sits cross-legged with a stone and draws the blade along it, not hurried, not slow, listening with his fingers for the burr's surrender. Another rubs oil into mail until links drink and shine, checking for weak rivets with the blind reading of habit. Bows are unstrung after rain, braced before dawn. Strings are waxed, arrows counted, fletchings smoothed with a thumbnail. A spearhead is checked for looseness. A lance's grip is rewrapped where sweat has made honesty of leather. These are the chores of survival, disguised as devotion. When battle joins, weapons write their signatures on air. Lances crack like dry trees. Arrows whisper like a field of grain shaken by a sudden wind. Swords ring, dull at first, and then flatter as edges nick and chip. Maces thud like doors shut hard. Axes chop a rhythm that is never dance. Men cry out, not always words. Horses scream in a way that makes the heart mislay itself for a moment. Shields thump, stones roar. Sound becomes a weather that no ear escapes, and through it the body learns what the mind cannot parse, where to turn, when to lift, which way the line leans. Strategy belongs to captains. Instinct belongs to weapons. In a crush, a dagger finds work. On a flank, the spear earns its bread. When the ground is a soup, it was not in mourning. The man with a short axe keeps his feet while the long blade tangles. On a slope, arrows learn humility. In a lane, horsemen curse their taller pride. In a sunken road, pikes discover there are too many brothers and not enough space. The art lies in marrying tool to hour, iron to earth, courage to place. Weapons have manners, and their absence tells on a man. A sword raised too high hangs the arm and opens ribs. A shield carried too low makes faith in one's legs carry more than it should. A spear gripped too far back gives the enemy an invitation he will understand. The trained hand wastes nothing, not motion, not breath, not hatred. Hatred cheapens and makes sloppiness. Professionalism, though no minstrel sings of it, keeps men alive who otherwise would have fed crows. There is a sacrilege in weapons no one speaks of, and everyone knows the moment when a tool ceases to answer command and becomes a hunger. A man who loves the hit more than the right hits harder and then wrong. He lifts again when lifting is no longer required by honor. Priests and captains watch for that bright, ugly fever. After battle, confessions are heard under trees whose bark remembers nails from other wars. A sword lies across two knees, and a man explains to God at length why his edge went where it did. The steel is silent. It will be silent in any hand. Conscience must do the speaking. After the roar, quiet labor returns with its solemn face. Blades are washed not only of blood but of salt. Oil follows, linen wipes again, nicks are counted, stories are told around each one as if to justify them. Broken shafts are stacked for fire, good heads are collected for new poles. Arrows are plucked from ground and bodies alike, reusable in the unromantic economy of war. A bow with a lifted splinter is bound and set aside with a sigh. A crossbow string broken at a bad hour is replaced with a muttered thanks that the hour was survived. Repair is the truest brother of battle. The dead are inventory too, and this is one of war's colder truths. Harness is stripped, sometimes with reverence, sometimes without. The good pieces will serve again upon another man's bone. A captured engine is a prize worth more than a banner. It is disassembled with carpenter's care, as if undoing a spell. The field is gleaned like stubble after harvest bolts, arrows, buckles, knives, horseshoes pried from hoof. Scavengers know the value of iron, and so do lords. There is little waste where metal has spoken. Weapons live in stories when they are not in hands. A sword earns a name not by length, but by the hour it was where it must be. A spear is remembered because its bearer set it once and did not let it slip. A bow is praised because its owner's eye held steady when the sky darkened with others' arrows. A mace wins a poor nickname whispered with grim respect. The bell because it rang so many helms. An axe is called plough because it turned so much soil that day where men lay. Such christenings are a way of moving guilt off the shoulders and onto the iron. It is its wise, but it is human. The piece that follows learns to live with the tools that built it. A spearhead finds its way to a cottage and becomes a hay knife. A broken sword is ground into scythes. A bent crossbow stirrup becomes a door hinge in a poor street where metal is precious. Male links are cut and stitched into mitts for a smith who works near flames. A shield's painted board faces a chicken coop until rain eats the lion from it. War's furniture returns to housekeeping, and the world grows a little easier because iron remembers many shapes. And yet, in the corner of the hall, above the Lord's bench, a good blade hangs, oiled and wrapped, sleeping like a winter seed. It is a reminder and a threat both, a story with its mouth closed. Children glance up at it while passing trenches. The old eye it too, measuring themselves against weights they no longer lift. The steward dusts it with a care that borders on devout. For everyone knows peace is at a dismissal of weapons, but a truce with them, a compact that their voices will not be required today. So the weapons of war are not monsters born from rage, they are crafts for which men prayed before using. They are the proof that earth gives out iron and men give out sleep to shape it. They are arguments hammered thin and then thick again. They are the edge between courage and cruelty, drawn new each morning by the hand that lifts them. In their presence the heart learns its balance, to be quick without haste, strong without hardness, exact without pride. And when the curfew bell of battle at last is rung, when drums fall silent and the watch takes up its slower pace, same hands that swung and thrust and loosed turn again to oil, to whetstone, to the small faithful chores by which tomorrow's mercy is prepared. Episode 16, Medieval Medicine and Healing. In the medieval world, life was precious because it was fragile. The body was seen as a vessel of clay, easily broken, constantly threatened by forces both seen and unseen. Sickness lingered close at hand, and health was a blessing never taken for granted. Children knew frailty earliest. Many did not survive beyond infancy. Mothers whispered prayers as they rocked newborns, sprinkling holy water, tying charms at cradles. Each cough brought fear, each fever dread. To see a child live through early years was joy as much as relief. Adults bore scars of survival. Their hands were calloused from labor, their backs bent by toil, their teeth worn or missing. Illness struck without warning. Fevers, chills, coughs, and sows. Some recovered, others weakened for life. All lived with awareness that strength could vanish overnight. Theories of health explained fragility. Physicians spoke of humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. To be healthy was to be balanced. To be sick was to be imbalanced. Hot and cold, wet and dry, sweet and bitter, each food, each herb, each act tipped scale of body's harmony. Villagers repeated wisdom in proverbs. Too much heat breeds fever. Eat onions for strength, honey for health, garlic to drive away ill. Knowledge passed from mouth to mouth, shaping daily choices, guiding meals and remedies alike. The body was believed porous, open to airs and vapors. Foul smells were thought dangerous, carrying disease in invisible breath. Streets thick with refuse, swamps heavy with mist, markets reeking of fish. All were seen not only as foul, but deadly. Astrology, too, shaped understanding. The position of stars influenced illness. The moon tugged on humors as surely as on tides. Physicians cast horoscopes before bleeding patients. Midwives whispered phases of moon before births. Heaven and body were linked, woven in same pattern. Yet daily life offered little protection. Water was often foul, food sometimes spoiled, winters harsh, summers diseased, wounds festered, teeth rotted, eyes failed. People lived with pain as constant companion, rarely expecting long years without suffering. Children learned early to fear illness. They saw neighbors carried to churchyards, heard bells toll for plague, watched parents whisper prayers over fevers. They knew bodies failed, even young ones, and prayed for mercy in each Mass. The city magnified fragility. Crowded alleys spread coughs swiftly. Foul air thickened, vermin multiplied. A single fever might spread from one street to another, filling parish with weeping. Rural villages too suffered, but cities' press of bodies sharpened risk. The countryside bore its dangers differently. Harsh winters left children thin, harvest failures starved bellies, labor in fields bent bones. Rural bodies grew sturdy but weary, resilience hardened by toil, yet no less vulnerable to illness. Faith explained much. Illness was sometimes seen as trial, sometimes as punishment, sometimes as chance for repentance. Priests reminded sick to confess sins, to make peace with neighbors, to trust that suffering had meaning in eyes of God. Still, remedies were sought eagerly. People carried charms of saints, drank waters from holy wells, rubbed wounds with herbs, fasted or feasted according to advice. Each cure offered hope, each hope clung to, for no one wished to meet sickness without a fight. Mothers knew dozens of home remedies: chamomile for stomach, garlic for lungs, honey for wounds, vinegar for fevers. Some worked, some did not, but all were tried, for every effort meant love. Men sought stronger cures: bloodletting with leeches or knives, cupping with heated cups, purging with herbs or powders. Harsh treatments, often painful, were endured with hope of restoring balance. Fear of contagion shaped life. In times of plague, families locked doors, fled city, or left sick behind. Priests carried relics in procession, bells tolled unceasing, fires burned in streets to purify air. Fear hung as heavy as smoke. Even small wounds carried wrist. A cut from scythe, a scratch from nail, a bite from dog, all could fester into fever. Limb lost, life ended. Children learned quickly to fear infection, though they had no word for it. Old age was a rare blessing. Wrinkled faces, bent backs, white hair were signs of survival as much as of years. Elders were respected not only for wisdom, but for rarity, proof that some bodies endured despite fragility. Stories told of miraculous cures, saints who healed with touch, relics that banished fever. These stories gave hope, carried from village to village, whispered at sickbeds, repeated in markets. Hope was medicine as much as herbs. And so, in medieval world, the body was understood as delicate balance, easily disturbed, constantly threatened. Illness was not surprise, but expectation, health not certainty, but grace. The fragile body shaped every life, every prayer, every family's memory. It taught patience, humility, and gratitude. To wake healthy was blessing, to sleep without fever was gift, to live long was miracle. Thus, medieval people lived close to frailty, closer than we do now. Their strength was in endurance, in laughter amid pain, in faith amid fear. Their bodies fragile, but their spirit resilient. In every village there was one figure sought, when sickness struck, when fevers burned, or when a birth drew near. She was the wise woman, healer, midwife, keeper of herbs and charms. Her knowledge did not come from books, but from fields, forests, and long memory. Her cottage often stood at edge of village, close to hedgerows and streams where herbs grew. Bundles of plants hung drying from rafters, sage, thyme, rosemary, lavender, fennel, yarrow. Their scents mingled with smoke of hearth, filling room with sharpness and sweetness alike. Children came shyly to her door, clutching coins or eggs as payment. Mothers followed with sick infants, men with wounds from fields, elders with aching bones. Each trusted thee, for her remedies were woven from nature itself. She knew which leaves soothed fevers, willow bark boiled in water eased pain, chamomile calmed stomachs, garlic drove away coughs, honey cleansed wounds, keeping rot at bay. Her knowledge passed from grandmother to mother to daughter, a lineage of care older than church or crown. But her wisdom was not only herbs. She spoke charms softly as she tied bandages, traced crosses in air, muttered prayers to saints. Healing was mixture of faith and leaf, of word and water. People believed both worked together, body and soul needing cure alike. In childbirth, the role was greatest. She soothed mothers, steadied hands, whispered courage. She brewed teas to ease pain, rubbed oils into skin, guided infants into world with patience learned from countless nights of labor. Candles burned, prayers whispered, her presence a shield between life and death. Yet her power drew suspicion. Priests sometimes frowned at her charms, calling them superstition. Neighbors whispered when cures failed, blaming witchcraft or ill will. Her closeness to life and death made her feared as well as needed. Still, she was sought in secret even by those who doubted. A priest might send servant for herbs against cough, A wealthy merchant's wife might call her to ease childbirth. She was at once mistrusted and indispensable. Her garden was living book. Rows of mint, sage, rue, and fennel grew beside door. In hedgerows she gathered nettles, dandelions, and elderflowers. In woods she cut bark and roots. In meadows she plucked blossoms. Each season brought new remedies. Each plant had purpose. Spring meant fresh greens for cleansing blood. Summer gave abundance of blossoms for teas and salves. Autumn yielded roots and berries, stored for winter fevers. Winter tested her stores, jars lined in rows, herbs ground into powders, oils sealed in flasks. Children watched her gather plants, learning by sight and smell. She crushed leaves between fingers, told which healed and which harmed. She warned of deadly nightshade, of foxglove's beauty hiding poison. Knowledge was survival, and ignorance could kill. Her cures carried ritual. She might cut herbs only at dawn, speak prayer as she picked, or gather root only when moon was high. Such practices blended magic and medicine, faith and folklore. To villages they were part of cure as surely as plant itself. Payment was rarely coin alone. Eggs, bread, wool, or labor were given in thanks. Her role was woven into community, her care returned by gifts that kept her humble cottage alive. Stories grew around her. Some said she could foretell storms by watching clouds, or sense death before it came. Others claimed she spoke with birds or knew secrets of animals. Whether true or not, such tales deepened her mystery. Children feared and loved her. They whispered tales of witches at night, yet ran to her for honey when sick. She was at once grandmotherly and uncanny, embodiment of wisdom older than books. When plague struck, she brewed stronger potions, vinegar with herbs, posies of flowers to carry, smokes of juniper to cleanse air. Many still died, but some lived, and those who lived remembered her remedies with reverence. Sometimes she stood trial of gossip. If cows sickened, neighbors muttered her name. If harvest failed, some blamed it herbs. Yet when illness struck, those same neighbors knocked at her door begging help. Her life was fragile balance of fear and need. Her role as midwife bound her most deeply to families. She was there at first cries, wiping blood, whispering thanks to saints. She was there when mothers weakened, holding hands, praying. She was memory of birth itself, witness of life's threshold. Songs and sayings honored her work. No herb without its virtue, villagers said, repeating her wisdom. Children learned rhymes to remember plants, charms whispered half in play, half in reverence. Even priests softened in time. Many came to see her as ally, her herbs complementing sacraments, her hands guided by providence. Some monasteries even welcomed her, trading seeds and knowledge, recognizing that God's creation healed as surely as prayer. At night she sat by fire, grinding herbs with mortar, mixing salves, brewing teas. Candles flickered, shadows danced on rafters hung with plants. Her life was steady rhythm: gather, prepare, heal, pray. In old age, wisdom grew treasured. Villages brought daughters to learn, grandchildren to watch. Her memory became community's memory. Her voice carried into future through those she taught. The wise woman embodied union of earth and spirit. Her hands held herbs, her lips prayers, her eyes compassion. She lived at edge of village, yet heart of life pulsed through her work. Thus the medieval world honored and feared her, trusted and doubted her, needed and whispered about her. She was healer, midwife, guardian of knowledge, keeper of hope. And so, in every village, the wise woman stood as a reminder that healing was as much mystery as medicine, as much faith as herb, as much love as knowledge. If the wise woman belonged to the village, the monastery held its own tradition of healing. Behind stone walls, amid gardens and cloisters, monks tended bodies as well as souls. They copied books of medicine, cultivated herbs, and cared for the poor. Their work a blend of prayer, discipline, and practical mercy. Every monastery had its infirmary. This was not a grand hall, but a long chamber lined with beds, straw mattresses covered in linen, wooden stools by each. Light streamed through narrow windows, candles burned by night, and crucifixes hung above. Here the sick brothers lay when fever or wounds overcame them. Monks cared for one another tenderly. Brothers washed brows with cool cloths, read psalms at bedsides, whispered prayers for healing. Meals were softened into broths, herbs brewed into teas. Silence reigned, broken only by prayer or gentle footsteps of caregiver. Yet monasteries did not care for monks alone. Travelers and beggars found rest in guest houses, and the ill were often brought to monastic infirmaries. Charity demanded that sick be sheltered, fed, and tended. Many who had nowhere else turned to monastery door in hope of mercy. Herb gardens grew within cloisters, beds lined neatly with sage, rue, fennel, rosemary, mint, chamomile, and dozens more. Monks studied their uses, following texts of Gale and Dioscorides, blending ancient wisdom with their own experiments. Each leaf was known, each root valued. The apothecary's chamber smelled richly of dried plants. Bundles hung from beams, jars lined shelves, mortars and pestles lay ready. Monks ground powders, mixed ointments, steeped tinctures. Recipes were copied in neat Latin script, preserved in manuscripts bound with leather. Medicine and faith mingled. A monk might prescribe fennel for stomach, honey for wound, garlic for lungs, but always with prayer. Healing was never seen as plant alone, but plant blessed by God, nature guided by Creator. Some monasteries became famed for skill. Pilgrims journeyed to their doors seeking cures, hoping to touch relics as well as taste remedies. Word spread of monks who eased fevers, soothed sores, or saved lives when others failed. Care extended to mind as well. Brothers read scripture to the sick, sang psalms, told stories of saints' endurance. Patients were reminded that suffering could purify, that illness was path to humility, that even weakness had purpose. Infirmaras, monks chosen for healing duty, were trained carefully. They studied herbs, diets, bleeding, and baths. They observed patients closely, recording symptoms, testing remedies. Their duty was holy work, service to both body and soul. Bathing was often part of cure. Warm water eased joints, cleansed skin, and comforted spirit. Monks filled tubs, poured heated water, mixed herbs like chamomile or lavender. The act was both medicinal and merciful. And diet was medicine too. Broths of leeks and onions, honey mixed with vinegar, warm milk with herbs, bread softened in ale. Food was chosen not only for nourishment but for humoral balance, cooling or warming, drying or moistening as needed. Monks copied medical texts by candlelight. Ancient works of Hippocrates, Galen, and Arabic physicians were preserved in their hands. Illustrations showed herbs, diagrams of bodies, instructions for treatments. In this way, knowledge survived centuries of turmoil. Yet humility marked their practice. They knew cures often failed, prayers went unanswered, death came despite effort. Their task was what mastery but service, offering care in trust of God's will. When plague came, monasteries suffered terribly. Brothers fell ill one after another, infirmaries filled beyond measure. Yet still they tended one another, singing psalms as they died, faith stronger than fear. Many monasteries lost half their numbers, but those who survived carried memory of courage and loss. Pilgrims often brought gifts in thanks for healing, candles, coins, or relics. Monasteries grew in wealth and reputation through such gratitude, though monks saw it as offering to God, not themselves. Children sometimes came to monasteries for cures. A sick boy carried by mother, a fevered girl laid at infirmary bed. Brothers tended them gently, giving herbs, whispering blessings. Families remembered such mercy all their lives. Silence of cloisters soothed as much as remedies. Birds sang in gardens, fountains trickled, chants rose softly. The atmosphere itself healed, reminding sufferers that peace was possible even in pain. Monastic care influenced cities. Hospitals founded by guilds and bishops often followed monastic models, with herb gardens, chapels, and rules of discipline. The monastery spirit spread outward into wider world. Legends told of miraculous cures by saints once monks. Saint Benedict healing with prayer, Saint Hildegard of Bingen teaching virtues of herbs, countless others whose lives mixed devotion and healing. Their stories inspired future generations. At night, infirmaries glowed with candlelight. Brothers walked softly, checking beds, whispering prayers. Some patients slept peacefully, others moaned, others drifted toward death. All were held in care, none left alone. Thus the monastery stood as refuge of healing, herbs and prayers, books and baths, silence and mercy. It was place where body and soul met in care, where fragility was met with compassion, and where healing, whether of flesh or spirit, was offered freely. And so monks and their healing hands preserved knowledge, gave comfort, and embodied faith. Their work was quiet, steady, humble, but its echo shaped centuries, carrying wisdom through dark time until light of learning rose anew. If monks healed with prayer and herbs, the Barber-Surgeon healed with blade. His shop smelled not of incense, but of blood and soap. His work marked not by chant, but by the scrape of steel. He was craftsman of flesh, part healer, part tradesman, part spectacle, and his place was as feared as it was sought. The Barber-Surgeon's sign was a pole painted with red and white. Red for blood, white for bandages, the mark of his trade. Outside his door, apprentices sharpened razors, polished knives, and set out basins of water. Inside, stools and benches waited for those bold or desperate enough to sit. His skills were many. He cut hair and shaved beards, but more importantly, he bled patients to balance humus. He lanced boils, stitched wounds, set broken bones, and pulled rotten teeth with iron forceps. His hands were strong, his tools sharp, his patients often groaning. Bloodletting was his most common task. A vein cut, blood flowing into basin, patient gripping chair as weakness spread. Some fainted, some wept, some claimed relief. To the Barber-Surgeon it was ordinary as bread. To a baker the body's balance restored with a few ounces of blood. Leeches were his allies. Kept in jars of water, they wriggled until placed on skin. They clung greedily, sucking until full, then dropped off, leaving small wounds behind. Patients shuddered, but many trusted the leech more than knife, its slow draw seen as gentler. Tooth pulling was roughest of all. A patient sat gripping arms of chair, mouth forced open, iron forceps clamped, twisted, yanked, screams echoed, blood spurted, tooth held aloft in triumph. Pain was sharp but brief, relief sometimes lasting, sometimes leading to worse infection. Broken bones he bound with splints, wounds he stitched with coarse thread, burns he covered with ointments. His tools were simple, knives, needles, cups, cauteries, yet his work saved lives more often than it ended them. Crowds sometimes gathered for difficult tasks, Amputations, rare but real, drew onlookers. A limb crushed by wheel or severed by blade had to be cut away. Assistants held patient fast. Surgeon worked quick with saw. Heated iron sealed wound. The cries lingered in memory, but so too did survival. The barber-surgeon worked in noise, at silence. Patients groaned, apprentices shouted, steel clattered, crowds muttered. His was healing done in open air, visible and raw, not cloistered like monks' infirmaries. He learned by doing, that by book. Apprentices watched, fetched tools, wiped blood, practiced on animals before touching men. Each mistake marked in scars of patient, each success remembered as proof of skill. Payment was in coin, but also barter. A farmer gave eggs, a cobbler shoes, a brewer ale. Healing was trade like any craft, and surgeon lived by hands as surely as smith or cooper. Fear and trust mingled in his reputation. Some called him butcher, others savior. Those he cured praised him, those who died cursed his name. Yet his shop was always busy, for pain made courage out of desperation. Barber-surgeons also served armies. On battlefields they stitched wounds, set bones, and amputated shattered limbs. Their tents smelled of blood and sweat, cries of soldiers ringing. Without them, few survived long after combat. Townsfolk came for lesser needs too. A cut shaved clean, a boil lanced, a splinter removed. Not every visit was bloody, though blood was never far. Superstition entered even here. Some surgeons muttered prayers before cutting, or carried charms for steady hands. Others claimed skill alone was enough, their pride as sharp as knives they wielded. His tools were simple but fearsome. Knives honed thin, saws sharp-toothed, forceps heavy, cautery irons heated red. Jars of leeches, bowls for blood, cloths for binding. To see them laid out was to feel fear rise, even before pain began. Children whispered tales of barber-surgeons. They feared being taken for bleeding, laughed nervously at stories of teeth pulled, watched wide-eyed as patients left pale and trembling. The surgeon was figure of awe and dread. Sometimes failure was blamed on him. A wound festered, a fever grew worse, a patient died, and whispers followed. Yet others swore by his skill, pointing to limbs saved, lives preserved. His reputation was fragile, swinging between honor and suspicion. Markets rang with his cries. Bloodletting, teeth pulled, bones set, he advertised loudly, competing with sellers of herbs and charms. Some chose wise woman, some monk, some surgeon. Many tried all three in turn, desperate for cure. Though rough, his craft mattered. He eased pain, closed wounds, gave relief. He bore blood on hands so others might live. Crude though it seemed, It was bridge between ancient remedies and modern surgery. At night, he cleaned tools in firelight, sharpening knives, boiling cups, preparing for next day. Apprentices swept floor, washed cloths, carried away bowls of blood to dump in gutters. The work was unending, for sickness never slept. In death, his memory lingered in scars of survivors, a missing tooth, a healed cut, a limb saved or lost. His work etched itself into bodies, permanent record of his skill and failure alike. Thus the Barber-Surgeon stood as figure of medieval medicine, practical, bloody, necessary, and feared. He worked where monks hesitated, where herbs failed, where pain demanded blade. And so his pole stood in streets as symbol, red for blood, white for bandage, sign that healing might hurt, but healing was needed. His shop a place of pain, yet also of hope, the Barber-Surgeon a paradox, feared yet never without work. When herbs failed, when surgeons' knives brought no relief, when prayers in parish church seemed unanswered, there was still another hope. The sick, the maimed, the blind, and the weary turned to road of pilgrimage, seeking healing at shrines, holy wells, and relics. For many, the journey itself was cure as much as destination. Families prepared with care. A crippled man leaned on staff. A mother carried sick child in arms, a fevered youth wrapped in cloak. Neighbors pressed coins into hands. Priests blessed travelers, and they set forth, eyes fixed on distant saint. Roads filled with such seekers, they limped, they stumbled, they sang hymns through pain. Pilgrim staffs clattered, cockle shells gleamed on cloaks, badges pinned to hats. Every step was prayer, every mile sacrifice offered in hope of mercy. Shrines drew them from far and wide. St. Thomas at Canterbury, St. James at Compostela, countless local saints in chapels and crypts. Some journeys lasted days, others months, even years. Each shrine promised miracle, each relic shimmered with possibility of cure. Holy wells were favored, water believed, blessed by saint's hand, bubbled cool and clear. Pilgrims drank, washed souls, bathed limbs, filled flasks to carry home. Some claimed instant healing, others slow relief, still others only comfort of ritual. Relics were most powerful, a vial of saint's blood, a splinter of true cross, a bone in silver reliquary, each carried promise of healing touch. Pilgrims pressed close, kissed glass, touched cloths, tied tokens in thanks. The reliquary gleamed in candlelight, hope blazing as bright as gold. Stories spread like fire. A blind girl who saw after touching relic, a crippled man who rose and walked, a fever gone overnight. Such tales traveled faster than merchants' goods, drawing crowds, feeding faith. Yet not all were cured. Some returned as sick as they left, their hope unmet. Still, many claimed comfort, that they had tried, that saint heard, that even in sickness they were blessed. The journey itself changed hearts. Along road, pilgrims prayed together, sang psalms, shared bread. Strangers became companions, suffering shared became lighter. Healing was not always of body, but of spirit, burdens carried in company. Markets grew near shrines, sellers offered candles, badges, ampullae filled with holy water, scraps of cloth touched a relic. Some mocked such trade, others saw them as tokens of faith, reminders to carry home. Hospitals lined pilgrimage routes, run by monasteries or guilds. They offered beds, broths, prayers. Sick were welcomed, tended, blessed. Even if cure was found, care was given. Children sometimes led parents, guiding blind mothers, steadying lame fathers. Their small hands carried great hope, their eyes shining with belief that saint would help. Their voices sang hymns sweeter for their innocence. Processions of pilgrims entered cities. Banners waved, candles burned, bells rang. Sick were carried on litters, blind led by ropes. Cripples hobbled on crutches. Crowds watched, some pitying, some mocking, but many joining in prayer. At shrine itself, emotion overflowed. Some wept, some shouted thanks, some fell silent. The weight of journey broke in tears, the hope of healing filled air thick as incense. Priests moved among pilgrims, blessing, absolving, guiding hands to relic. Cures were recorded. Monks wrote names, illnesses, miracles claimed. Books filled with testimonies, proving saints' power, drawing more pilgrims. Such records became treasure of church, proof of heaven's mercy on earth. But pilgrimage was not only miracle, it was penance, discipline, offering. To walk in pain, to kneel at shrine, to sleep on hard ground, these acts themselves were believed healing for soul. Even if body stayed frail, spirit was strengthened. Pilgrimage bound rich and poor alike. Nobles rode with retinues, peasants walked barefoot, merchants traveled with goods. At shrine all knelt together, humbled before saint, equal in need of mercy. Songs of pilgrims echoed on roads. Ultrea, forward on they sang to Santiago, Blessed Thomas, hear us, to Canterbury. Music itself was healing, words of faith carried in rhythm of walking feet. Children remembered such journeys all their lives. Even if no miracle cured them, the memory of candles, chants, and relics glowed within, giving comfort in later sorrows. Sometimes healing came not in sudden miracle, but in peace. Pain endured, but heart felt lighter. Fear remained, but courage grew. Body frail, but soul strong. Pilgrims called this healing too, blessing beyond cure. At journey's end, badges were worn proudly, a scallop shell from Compostela, a lead ampulla from Canterbury, a token from local saint, proof that one had walked, prayed, and hoped. They became heirlooms passed to children as memory of faith. Thus, pilgrimage for healing was woven of faith and pain, of hope and journey. It gave comfort to sick, bound communities, filled cities with prayer and song. The road itself became shrine, each step sacrifice, each mile offering. Healing lay not only at end, but in journey itself, body and soul shaped by road beneath feet. And so, in medieval world, the sick sought saints as surely as surgeons, wells as eagerly as herbs. Their hope was never quenched, their journeys never wasted, for even without miracle they returned with faith renewed. Not all cures came from herbs or saints. In the shadows between faith and fear, people turned to charms, spells, and whispered words. Superstition wove itself into medicine, shaping lives with unseen powers, half trusted, half feared. Amulets were common, a small cross carved from wood, a relic seeming bone, a piece of parchment inscribed with psalm, each hung on cord around neck, tied at wrist, or hidden in clothing. Mothers tied charms on children, hoping to guard them from fevers and falls. Words themselves held power. Some whispered prayers of saints, as if spell, repeating names 3 times, or muttering Latin phrases learned by rote, the line between holy prayer and magical incantation blurred, both carrying weight of hope. Spells for healing often mixed herbs with words. A poultice of plantain was bound on wound while charm was spoken. Bone to bone, blood to blood, sinew to sinew, heal as Christ would. Words and leaves worked together, neither complete without the other. Superstition touched daily acts. A sick child's shirt might be turned inside out, fever cured by crossing running water thrice, toothache eased by burying tooth beneath threshold. Such acts may seem strange, but to medieval mind they held logic born of tradition. Astrology deepened mystery. Healers studied stars before bleeding, timing cuts to phases of moon or positions of planets. A wound stitched under wrong sign was thought to fester, medicine given at wrong hour to fail. Heaven's order was believed mirrored in body's health. Animals played part in cures. Wolf's tooth hung around neck for courage, hare's foot for luck, dove's heart burned to banish melancholy. Superstition made men trust in beasts as much as in saints. Witches were feared in this realm. When illness lingered, some whispered of curses, charms twisted to harm rather than heal. A cow's milk souring, a child wasting, a wound festering, all might be blamed on malice hidden in spell. Yet not all witches were malevolent. Many were simply wise women, healers mistrusted for knowledge beyond priest's blessing. The thin line between healing and witchcraft was walked daily. trust and suspicion balanced on knife's edge. Children learned rhymes with power. To stop nosebleed, Christ was born in Bethlehem, water flowed in Jordan, stop, blood, stop. Such words mix sacred and common, turning nursery verse into medicine. Superstition was strongest in plague. Posies carried to ward off foul air, charms tied to doors, fires lit to drive away spirits. People feared not only sickness, but invisible demons riding on winds. Dreams were read as omens of health. To dream of clear water was sign of recovery, of fire sign of fever, of bread sign of strength. Families clung to such signs, hope woven in sleep. Objects carried memory of cures. A pebble touched a shrine, a coin blessed by priest, a feather found at holy place. Each pocketed, each treasured, each believed to carry power. Some cures demanded ritual. A wart rubbed with raw meat and buried at crossroads, sickness transferred into animal and driven from village, fevers beaten with willow rods. To modernize, strange, to medieval mind, necessary. Superstition carried comfort. When herbs failed and prayers seemed unanswered, a charm gave sense of control. It offered action against unseen forces, reminding people they were what helpless in face of illness. Yet priests often warned against it. Some denounced charms as devil's trick, urging trust only in sacraments. Still, many parishioners held both rosary and charm, prayed at altar and whispered spell at bedside. Faith and superstition lived side by side. Markets sold charms openly, rings against cramp, stones against madness, relic badges against plague. Merchants shouted their powers, pilgrims bought eagerly, poor treasured them as protection. Children imitated elders, tying threads around dolls, chanting rhymes to heal scratches, playing games that mimic spells. In their play, old traditions lived on, half jest, half belief. Even physicians sometimes indulged. Learned men might scorn charms in public, but many carried astrological charts, consulted phases of moon, or muttered Latin blessing as they cut. Science and superstition twined, inseparable. Tales of miracles mingled with spells. A fever broken by relic might also be credited to charm, a healing seen as work of saint or power of words. People cared less for source than for result. Superstition was not only fear but wonder. It filled world with meaning, made plants, stars, animals, and stones part of healing. Nothing was ordinary, all carried hidden power, waiting to be used. Thus charms and spells formed third thread of healing, beside herbs and prayer. They reminded medieval soul that unseen forces shaped life, that mystery dwelt in every corner, and that hope could be found in even strangest acts. And so the sick wore amulets, whispered charms, timed cures by stars, and placed trust in both cross and pebble, both saint and rhyme. In their world all worked together, body, soul, earth, and heaven, bound by words half magic, half prayer.